Exactly 1 year ago, an entire alpine village disappeared in less than 40 seconds. A violent wall of rock, its ice, and mud exploded down the mountain at nearly 200 kilometers per hour, crushing everything in its path beneath millions of cubic meters of debris. Homes that had stood for generations vanished almost instantly. Roads disappeared, trees folded beneath the impact like paper, and when the dust finally settled, one of the oldest villages in the Swiss Alps was simply gone. But what makes this story even more unsettling is that the people had already left. Scientists had seen the warning signs early enough to evacuate nearly 300 residents before the collapse began. At the time, many believed the danger had passed with them. It hadn't, because now, just a short distance from the ruins of Blatten, another glacier is beginning to show the same disturbing signals, the same instability, the same fractures, the same silent movement deep inside the mountain. And this time, even the experts admit they may still not fully understand what comes next. Subscribe for honest geological updates, glacier warnings, and powerful stories revealing how rapidly our planet is beginning to change. The Lel-Toskental Valley in southern Switzerland had long been known as one of the quietest and most isolated valleys in the Alps. Surrounded by towering snow-covered peaks and rivers of crystal-clear meltwater, it looked almost untouched by time itself. Small wooden chalets stood along the valley floor, many of them passed down through the same families for generations. In places like this, people did not just live near the mountains, their entire identity was built around them. At the head of the valley sat the village of Blatten, home to only a few hundred residents, but carrying centuries of history within its narrow streets and old timber homes. Some families could trace their roots there back hundreds of years. Grandparents, parents, and children had all grown up beneath the same mountains, looking out at the same glacier, every morning from the same kitchen windows. Life in Blatten moved slowly, peacefully, predictably, which is why what happened next felt almost impossible to understand. On the morning of May 28, 2025, that sense of permanence vanished forever. In less than a minute, an entire community that had survived for centuries was swallowed beneath rock, mud, and ice. The first signs appeared high above the village, near the steep slopes surrounding the Eueschbiel Glacier. At first, the changes seemed small. Chunks of rock began breaking away from the mountain face and crashing down onto the glacier below. But day after day, the falls became larger, louder, and more frequent. Some of the collapsing rocks were the size of houses. Swiss scientists watching the mountain in real time quickly realized this was no ordinary rockfall. The entire mountainside above Blatten was becoming unstable. As the danger increased, authorities made the decision few mountain communities ever expect to hear. Residents were ordered to evacuate. First came the removal of nearly 100 people living closest to the threat zone. Then, only days later, every remaining resident in Blatten and the nearby hamlet of Ride was told to leave within just 2 hours. Families rushed through homes filled with generations of memories, trying to decide what pieces of their lives could fit inside a single vehicle. Some carried old photographs. Others grabbed documents, clothing, or family heirlooms passed down for decades. Even the livestock had to be airlifted out by helicopter, one animal at a time, across Switzerland. One image captured national attention: a frightened cow named Loni, suspended beneath a rescue helicopter as the doomed valley waited silently below. And then everything went quiet. The mountain stopped moving. The valley waited. For the next 9 days, nothing happened. The mountain remained standing. The glacier stayed in place. No massive collapse came crashing into the valley below. And slowly, something dangerous began to return to the people waiting outside the evacuation zone: hope. Families checked their phones constantly for updates from local authorities. Some began wondering if the scientists had been overly cautious. Others quietly imagined themselves returning home within days, reopening barns, feeding animals, and sleeping once again beneath the same mountains their families had trusted for generations. But the waiting itself became its own kind of torment, because no one could give a clear answer. Scientists monitoring the slopes could see the instability growing deep inside the mountain, but they could not predict the exact moment the system would fail. All they could say was that the valley floor was no longer safe, and behind every hour of waiting sat another painful reality. The people of Blatten had not simply left buildings behind. They had left pieces of their identity: family photographs, handmade furniture, gardens planted decades earlier, the familiar view from a kitchen window seen every morning for an entire lifetime. Then, on the morning of May 28th, the mountain finally moved. At first, it sounded like distant thunder echoing through the Alps. Then the entire mountainside began to collapse. The Eueschbiel Glacier failed almost all at once. Millions of cubic meters of rock, mud, and ice broke free from the mountain and surged down toward the valley floor at terrifying speed. In less than 40 seconds, the landscape beneath it disappeared beneath a violent grey wave of debris, moving at nearly 200 kilometers per hour. From a distance, witnesses could only watch as enormous clouds of dust swallowed the village whole. Houses vanished beneath the avalanche one after another. Roads were ripped apart. Trees snapped instantly under the force of the impact. The familiar shape of Blatten, a place that had existed quietly for centuries, was erased in under a minute. And the destruction did not stop there. The massive debris flow slammed into the Lonza River, blocking the water and creating a growing lake behind the rubble. Almost immediately, officials feared a second disaster could follow if floodwaters burst through the unstable blockage downstream. By the time the collapse ended, nearly 90% of the village had been destroyed. Damage estimates climbed into the hundreds of millions of Swiss francs. It's only one person lost his life, a 64-year-old shepherd who had remained outside the evacuation zone. The warning had saved hundreds, but it could not save the village itself. To understand why the collapse happened, you have to look beyond the glacier itself and deep inside the mountain. Because what failed above Blatten was not simply ice. It was an entire natural structure that had been held together for thousands of years by something almost invisible: permafrost. High in the Alps, frozen water exists deep inside cracks and fractures within the rock. This underground ice acts like a kind of glue, locking unstable sections of the mountain together and helping steep cliffs remain solid for centuries. Most people never see it, but entire mountain ranges depend on it for stability. The problem is that the Alps are warming. As temperatures rise year after year, that frozen glue begins to thaw, and once it weakens, the mountain itself starts to come apart from the inside. Rock faces that remained stable for thousands of years can suddenly fracture within a single warm season. That is exactly what began happening above the Eueschbiel Glacier. Huge sections of rock broke loose from the Klein's Nesthorn and crashed down onto the glacier below. But here is the part that surprised even some experts. At first, all that debris actually slowed the melting of the glacier by covering the ice like an insulating blanket. But the protection came with a deadly cost. The enormous weight of the falling rock began pressing down on the glacier itself, forcing the ice to move faster and faster downhill. Slowly, the entire mountainside became overloaded like a shelf carrying more weight than it was ever designed to hold. And then, all at once, the system failed together. For many people, the destruction of Blatten felt like the end of the story. A terrible disaster had happened, the danger had passed, and the valley would eventually begin rebuilding. But while the world focused on the ruins left behind, Swiss scientists quietly turned their attention toward another glacier, only a few kilometers away. Its name is the Eueschbiel Glacier, and over recent months, monitoring systems have begun detecting something deeply unsettling: their isolated collapses, unusual movement, and structural anomalies similar to the warning signs seen before the Eueschbiel Glacier failed. Authorities have responded cautiously but seriously. Roads leading into the upper valley have been temporarily closed. Hiking trails near the glacier have been shut down. Surveillance teams are now monitoring the area day and night, watching for any sudden acceleration or instability inside the mountains above. What makes this moment so uncomfortable is the uncertainty surrounding it. Scientists are not saying another catastrophic collapse is guaranteed. The region around the glacier is largely uninhabited, making the situation very different from Blatten. But the warning signals now appearing belong to the same category of instability that experts observed before the first disaster. And that is the part people cannot ignore. Because once you have watched one mountain fail, every new crack, every falling rock, and every strange movement inside the ice begins to feel less like coincidence, and more like the beginning of something repeating itself. What happened in Switzerland is not an isolated event. That may be the most frightening part of this entire story. The same hidden process now destabilizing parts of the Alps is unfolding across mountain ranges all over the world. In the Andes of South America, thawing permafrost is weakening slopes above rapidly growing communities. In the Himalayas, villages in Nepal, India, and Pakistan already live under the constant threat of sudden glacial floods and collapsing ice systems. Farther north, mountain regions across Alaska and western Canada are showing similar signs of instability as temperatures continue rising year after year. And the warning signs are becoming harder to dismiss. In Italy, a massive section of the Marmolada Glacier collapsed during an intense heatwave, sending ice and debris racing through a crowded hiking area with devastating consequences. Scientists studying high mountain environments now believe many landscapes once considered stable are entering a complete new phase, one modern civilization has very little historical experience dealing with. That is what makes Blatten feel so significant. It is no longer just a local Swiss disaster. It has become a warning about something much larger happening across the planet. Because the real fear is not that one glacier failed. It's the real fear is that mountains everywhere may now be changing faster than humanity can fully understand or predict. What makes the disaster at Blatten so unsettling is not only the collapse itself, but what scientists admitted afterward. Even while monitoring the mountain in real time, they still could not predict the exact moment it would fail. They knew the glacier was unstable, They could see the warning signs growing worse day after day. Sensors detected movement. Rockfalls increased. The mountain was clearly changing. But knowing a disaster is possible is very different from knowing precisely when it will happen. And that uncertainty is what now troubles glaciologists around the world. One expert studying the region described the situation as chaotic because every mountain behaves differently. No two glacier collapses follow the exact same pattern. Some fail suddenly. Others remain unstable for years before breaking apart. The frightening reality is that science has become good at identifying mountains that are beginning to die. But predicting the exact hour they collapse still remains beyond human reach. And as temperatures continue rising and more permafrost thaws across the world's mountain ranges, the number of dangerous slope scientists are forced to monitor keeps growing larger every year. That may be the most uncomfortable truth of all. The tragedy at Blatten was called a success because hundreds of people survived. And in many ways it truly was. Early warnings worked. Scientists detected the danger in time. Families escaped before the mountain collapsed. Lives were saved. But beneath that success sits a far more unsettling question. If experts monitoring the mountain every hour could still be surprised by the scale and timing of the collapse, it's then how many other unstable peaks around the world are changing right now, without anyone fully understanding what comes next. That is the real shadow hanging over the Alps today. Not simply the fear of one glacier collapsing, but the realization that entire mountain systems may be entering a new and unpredictable era. One where the landscapes humans trusted for centuries no longer behave the way they once did. And perhaps the most frightening part is this. The greatest danger may not come from the mountains we are already watching, but from the ones we still believe are stable. Would you rebuild a town beneath a glacier after seeing this? Comment, rebuild or leave. Subscribe now for powerful geological stories. It's glacier warnings and real-world climate events shaping the future of our planet.